So now I'm going to talk to you about pelvic floor exercises. So your pelvic floor muscles sit within your pelvis, okay? They start at your coccyx bone at the very back and come round and forward to your pubic bone at the front and then out either side to your sitting bones. So look very much like that. Now I'll show you a little bit more on another model about your anatomy within your pelvis. So this is your pelvis, so now we're going to look at a cross section. So that's as though, imagine that we're slicing this in half, and then what we have is this diagram here. So we start off with your lumbar spine at the back, coming down to your coccyx bone. This is your rectum and your back passage, your womb and your vaginal canal, your bladder and urethra and your pubic bone, as I mentioned before. So if we remove them, then you can see where the pelvic floor muscle sits within this a little bit more. So you can see that it goes from the coccyx bone at the back, right around to the pubic bone at the front, and then out either side to your sitting bones, which are here. And through the middle of that muscle then goes through your back passage, your vaginal entry and your urethra. So that's why the pelvic floor muscles are really important in terms of the management of the control in these areas. So now I'm going to talk to you about pelvic floor exercises and how to do them. So as I mentioned, your pelvic floor muscle goes from the coccyx bone right around to the pubic bone. So we need to make sure that we're using all of this muscle. So the best way that we tend to find in physio when we examine people to get people to do a correct pelvic floor muscle technique is to squeeze as though you're trying to stop yourself from passing wind, and then come round and forward as though you're trying to stop yourself from passing water. Other ways to think about it is to either pretend that you've got a tail and you're trying to curl that between your legs, or as though you're trying to squeeze your back passage up to your belly button. You may find that one gives you a stronger feeling of contraction compared to another. And you then can use whichever cue gives you the best contraction. There are two ways that we want your pelvic floor muscle to work. We need endurance and we need speed. So from an endurance point of view, what you want to try and do is curl your tail, hold, aim for 5 seconds, 6 seconds, and then let that go. The release is just as important as the contraction. So if you find that you're fading away and you don't feel as though you're actually letting that muscle go, then you're probably trying to hold on for a little bit too long. So once you've found that baseline, so how long you can effectively hold that squeeze for, what you want to try and find then is how many of them that you can do in one go. What we tend to aim for in physio is aiming towards being able to do a 10-second hold 10 times. But if that's too much for you, that's absolutely fine. Just start where you can. So if there happens to be 5 lots of 4-second holds, that's fantastic. The second way that we want that muscle to work is quickly. So when you cough or sneeze, that muscle can react quickly enough to support your bladder. So with this, what we're looking to see and feel is a snapping up of that pelvic floor. So it's a quick snap up and then a release. Quick snap up and then a release. What we tend to find people do is more of a pulsing sensation. But that snap and that release is much more effective in improving that muscular strength. So there are a couple of ways that we tend to find people tend to cheat a little bit when they're doing the pelvic floor exercises. One of the main things we tend to find is when people are doing the pelvic floor is that they tend to squeeze their bum cheeks together. So you end up almost lifting yourself away from the chair, or you end up squeezing your legs together to try and pull everything together. That's not necessarily effective, and it means that everything's working on the outside but not a lot is going on the inside. So try and stay nice and relaxed. Sometimes just putting your hands on your hips can just help just to kind of get that feeling that actually no, there's nothing much going on there, and that contraction, that squeeze is happening all on the inside. Another way that people tend to cheat a little bit or find it a bit difficult to get the flow of doing pelvic floor exercises correctly is we tend to breath hold. So when we squeeze, we tend to squeeze up and shoulders and everything go up, and I'm going to hold my breath and try and do everything all at the same time, which can be quite difficult. Okay, so if you're struggling a little bit with that, what can be helpful is doing the squeeze, so doing your pelvic floor squeeze as you're breathing out. So you take a nice deep breath in, and then as you breathe out, you pull your pelvic floor up. And then you take a nice couple of normal breaths, as I'm doing here, maintaining my pelvic floor squeeze, and then relax. So there are a couple of ways that you can make the exercises either harder or easier, depending on how you're finding them. So what we tend to find is that lying down, so lying with your head rested on a pillow and your knees kind of like bent so your feet are flat on the bed, that can sometimes be the easiest position to do them in. Next hardest tends to be sitting, though some people do find it a little bit easier in sitting because they can feel themselves kind of as they're squeezing, just moving away from the chair a little bit. Once you feel that you've mastered lying and sitting, what you can start to do then is either kind of like stand up or lean against kind of like a wall, because that can be a really helpful way of just progressing those exercises, making them a little bit harder, a little bit more challenging, whilst maintaining to improve that muscular strength.